A given public lecture held at my defense of my thesis for the dr.philos degree at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, 2020. The topic I was given was the following: discuss the role of technology from different viewpoints with reference to the purpose of flipped learning and physical education. How could one's view in relation to the role of technology be influenced by different theories and understandings of how learning and knowledge is constructed? This is quite a wide topic, and I have chosen to focus on the following. I will firstly map out some common worldviews and views on knowledge and how knowledge can be understood. Then I will argue for what view is natural to focus on in an educational context and describe one didactical theory and one learning theory that fits well within the context and purpose of physical education and digital technology in schooling. How the chosen worldview can help us predict the future of physical education and what role digital technology will play rounds up this lecture. This is the title of my lecture: The Science of Digital Technology and Flipped Learning in Physical Education. Are we at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of a paradigm? To get a first glance at some important concepts, let's visualize them like this. This is the research methodology 3. And we have some concepts called ontology, epistemology, methodology, and methods. And visualized as a tree, we can say that the aim of this lecture is to understand how the roots and the trunk of the tree influence how the branches and the leaves appear to us. Concepts are branches of philosophy. Ontology examines the nature of reality, and epistemology examines how you can examine reality. Combining these two will give you your research paradigm or your research philosophy. These concepts are very well written about in literature, but what all authors essentially do is trying to present, sort, and explain these concepts, and often from very different perspectives. This has resulted in numerous interpretations, so as a student or a novice researcher digging into these concepts, one can often get more confused than enlightened. I am not trying to separate right from wrong in this lecture. You, as a student or researcher, will have to judge for yourself how you look at these arguments I present and how they fit into your worldview and logic. Ontology examines the nature of reality. So the key question is, what is reality? Examines the nature of knowledge. And the key question is, how can I know reality? Paradigm is the sum of these two concepts and will give you a holistic view on how you understand knowledge. And it's important to gain insight into these questions to understand research and to get both the benefits from research and to understand limitations in research. And as a researcher, one must lay basis in one's work in one or more paradigms. If not, one rejects the very idea of science. I'm going to talk about paradigm for a while now. And Fjørtoft has said that there is no one perception of what is research, what a research paradigm is or is not. And Kuhn says that a paradigm is a commonly recognized scientific result that for a time gives a group of researchers clearly defined problems and problem solutions, but all disciplines also has a pre-paradigmatic state. And Oderman reflects what Kuhn says and say that a paradigm is constituted as a disciplinary matrix. This is an entire theoretical, methodological, and evaluative framework within which scientists conduct their research. And Pyotov says that this matrix consists of four components: symbolic generalizations, metaphysics assumptions, values, and a paradigm or role model. And what Orman and Pyotov says is putting other words on what Kuhlmann originally says. And Mr. Thomas Samuel Kuhn, although he orients his work in natural science, it is a broad agreement that his contribution to social science is significant. Now established paradigms are published in numerous books, but in antique times, scientific classics like Aristotle's Physica and Newton's Principia and Optics served as guide for researchers. The late Kuhn has contributed much to the science of science, but he has also received critique and is highly disputed. One critique was that he uses the term paradigm in 21 different ways, so imagine being a novice in this field. Nevertheless, he is going to play an important role in this lecture. And what Urman says is, with his ideas drawn from Kuhn, is that this framework constitutes the basic assumptions of the discipline about how research in that discipline should be conducted, as well as what constitutes a good scientific explanation. And Kuhn focused on the normal science. When scientists operate within the same paradigm and shares the same matrix, a continuous form of research can arise, and Kuhn names this as normal science. Normal science is by Kuhn characterized as puzzle solving, is practiced according to a paradigm. The examples of science and practice, theories and procedures of a community of scientists, which may be large or small depending upon the subject of research. Thus, the paradigm is described within the normal science and the process of scientific activity based on the existing strong network of commitments, conceptual, theoretical, instrumental, and methodological. Using the image of puzzle solving in research communities, the role of ontological, epistemological, and methodological philosophies are kept at a distance, as those philosophical considerations are taken for granted within the paradigm. Educational science, well, I believe, has come past this pre-paradigmatic state. In normal science, as Kuhn claims, is the next state of Kuhn claims that the normal science, which is the next state after pre-paradigmatic state, the paradigm do not get tested but the scientist. It's like in chess. As a chess player, you analyze the upcoming movements, but you don't analyze the rules of the game. In educational science, we can recognize that we are at that stage, but has the science of digital technology and flipped learning in physical education come so far? I will come back to this question at the end of the lecture. There are several views on ontological views that exist, but I'm just going to look at some of them. And realism and relativism are two common used ontological worldviews, and they lay at each end of a continuum, as this arrow explains. Realism. This is a view that claims that there is one single truth, and this truth do not change. If you investigate how a human cell divide, you will most likely take a realism worldview stand. The nature and the truth is not viewed through a human perspective. Relativism or nominalism is the opposite of realism. And here we take a human perspective. When we look at the epistemology, which refers to how an individual understands knowledge, uh, how they understand their own thinking process, and how they think others know. There are also several different views that exist, but these two following are the ones most combined with the ontological views in the that we looked at. And these two also lie on each end of a continuum as shown before. Positivism is an ethic, which is an external social scientific perspective on reality, approach, and a subjective approach to reality. Interpretivism is an emic view, and that is the insider's or the native's perspective of reality. And this approach is an objective approach to reality. An emic perspective compels the recognition and acceptance of multiple realities. Documenting multiple perspectives of reality in a given study is crucial to an understanding of why people think and act in the different ways they do. These on ontology and epistemological concepts, we get different paradigms. And these will then result in the following two paradigms in social science. Combining realism with positivism, we get positivism. This paradigm leads to the researcher taking a quantitative approach, that is, systematic empirical investigation of observable phenomena via statistical, mathematical, or computational techniques. Questionnaires and systematic recordings of observations are some of the methods used to generate data. And here the mantra is to be objective and to stay back. Constructivism. This paradigm leads to the researcher taking a qualitative approach. This type of research answers questions related to why or how a certain phenomenon may occur, rather than how often it occurs. Interviews and observations are some of the many methods of generating data. Here the mantra is to dig deep, talk to people, and to understand contexts. Where do we stand today in educational science? Well, Hartes has said that educational inquiry involves elements that are simultaneously particular and universal, concrete and abstract, or specific and general, suggesting that dualism in constructed knowledge are meaningless because educational phenomena and our knowledge about them entails both qualitative and quantitative dimensions. And if this is where we stand, what would be a good approach to generate knowledge to understand education, physical education, and the role of digital technology in these contexts? Fortunately, there are more views to discover. These are the two paradigms we have viewed so far, and the dualism that Hart has mentioned is the fact that these two land on opposite ends of a continuum. We have also a common view called pragmatism. As a new paradigm, it replaces the older philosophy of knowledge approach, which understands social research in terms of ontology, epistemology, and methodology. This claim to be a new paradigm rests on demonstrating the broader view of pragmatism as a philosophical system, along with its immediate practicality for issues such as research design. Pragmatism is not just epistemology. Pragmatism is a rich philosophical tradition and is famous for its distinct approach to truth, method, and meaning. It originates in the early works of notable classical pragmatists such as Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, John Dewey, and George Herbert Mead. Kuhn's description of a paradigm have similarities with how we can view pragmatism, and physical education will also fall into this view of pragmatism as the focus is on practical activity, a diversity of realities, and a combination of practical and more cognitive knowledge. And the ontologist's view on pragmatism is that reality is not just one true or multiple realities, is that reality is constantly negotiated, debated, or interpreted. And the epistemological view in pragmatism is that knowledge must be examined using best suited tool. So in educational science, we find most researchers stating to belong to the paradigms of constructivism and pragmatism, and I support that view. So let's move on with these views and as basis when I discuss the role of technology with reference to the purpose of flipped learning and physical education. How can the purpose of physical education be understood as constructed and pragmatic? Well, in Norway, physical education had its infancy almost 2 decades ago, a strong connection to the army with the purpose of teaching army skills to young boys preparing for military service. Today, army skills are no longer central to the practice in PE in Norway. The subject is applied in school on the legitimation of health, the training of movements and outdoor life skills, and as a general Bildung subject supposed to inspire students to maintain a lifelong healthy lifestyle. And this reflects a global view of PE. As observed, PE develops over time in relation to its environment, social development, and processes. Hence, physical education in ontological terms is socially constructed. This is a pragmatic and constructivist view on PE. Things shall work in practical situations, and we have a mix of theory and practice. Unfortunately, too many of our students in school do not achieve this purpose, but I will not go into this literature in this lecture. So the conclusion is physical education is socially constructed. Hence, the purpose of physical education always will change over time, place, and context. This is a short description of what is flipped learning. And here we see that the role of the teacher being a lecturer changes to being a guide for student-centered activity in school, because what was earlier lectured will now be disposed for the students in a video, so they prepare looking at this video. And in 2018, the nonprofit Academy of Active Learning, Arts and Sciences organized a cohort of 100 experts in flipped learning from 49 countries to identify the best practices of flipped learning. And their definition of flipped learning is that flipped learning is a framework that enables educators to reach every student. The flipped approach inverts the traditional classroom model by introducing course concepts before class, allowing educators to use class time to guide each student through active, practical, innovative applications of the course principles. And I will come back to a proposal of what flipped learning and physical education can be and what that purpose can be. Moving from looking at knowledge to looking at learning of that knowledge. One thing is how we understand knowledge, but we also need to understand how students learn. First, we see the traditional didactical triangle, where the teacher, student, and the content each form a corner in the triangle. This is a didactical view, and that it looks a bit different. Now you can see that the teacher and the student are at the same place in the triangle, and the other two corners are policy documents and frames and distributed resources. And in the middle of the triangle is the theme or content um, uh, that are supposed to be learned in this context. And this didactical view is in line with how young people and interact in late modern and liquid modern society. The term design refers to that because the name of this triangle is the design-oriented didactical triangle, and it's proposed by researcher Salander in his book from 2017. And the design, the term design refers to that the teacher now designs the didactical activities in a different way, and that's to promote student activity and learning, and that the students are now, in our digital age, more free to design their own learning processes. The teacher's role in the design-oriented emphasized by Selander is not to become less important, but rather different, as the teacher now has to guide and support students where they need it. He further claims that instead of, and I quote, instead of focusing on instructional parts and the art of memorizing, the teacher can work on key questions, contexts, problem solving, and reflection. But Selander also emphasizes that this requires new ways of approaching the role as a teacher and implementing new tools like digital tools to plan, conduct, and to assess education. Flipped learning promotes something of a change in the relationship between the teacher and the students, as both have more time to interact, and the interactions between student, teacher, and among students changes due to the emphasis on student activity and cooperative learning activities. So I claim that flipped learning and that approach fits well with this design-oriented didactical triangle. I will come back to this shortly. Following are some general descriptions of situated learning and how this theory is connected to constructivist perspectives on learning. And so this is a learning theory. The theory of situated learning focuses on the relationship between learning and the social situations in which the learning occurs. Rather than asking what kinds of cognitive processes and conceptual structures are involved, they ask what kinds of social engagements provide the proper context for learning to take place. And that's from Lieven and Wegener, that has done a whole lot of work on the situated learning theory. And these two authors I will bring with me further in this lecture. But Revegno is also a well-known scholar in this field, and what the research claim is that in concert with constructivist perspectives, situated perspectives consider it very important for researchers and teachers to understand how students learn in school settings by understanding how students' pre-existing knowledge facilitates and impedes learning. And further, there are claims that constructivist perspectives have in the past and continue today to be a basis for research in physical education that addresses the curriculum, student learning and knowledge, teacher learning and knowledge, as well as content. So both general constructivist perspectives on learning and situated learning are well documented to fit well in a physical education context. And the Selander's didactical view and the view of Kohn on how we can understand the world, society, and human knowledge and pragmatism is also strongly connected to the theory of learning, which is called situated learning. Students learn together in physical education. Most activities are based on cooperation, and how and what the students learn must be seen in a social context where the students' learning depends on their peers' actions, attitudes, and support. Imagine practicing tennis where your learning partner only obstructs you, shows a bad attitude, and gives you no support. This learning environment will definitely affect your learning outcome in tennis and your motivation to continue practicing tennis. The roots of situated learning theory lies in the works of activity theorists such as Vygotsky and ideas proposed by Dewey, Piaget, and Gibson. This shift in thinking about teaching and learning is embraced and applied to physical education by scholars like Kirk and McDonald and Rovegno as a constructivist perspective on learning. As you remember, constructivism was one of the paradigms I emphasized earlier on as important lenses when looking at knowledge in physical education. So how can we understand the role of technology used in the flipped learning framework when we combine the theory of the design-oriented triangle and the theory of situated learning? This is one of the three corners in the design-oriented triangle. The teacher and the students are together in the learning situation. Wenger used the concept of legitimate peripheral participation as their version of the theory of situated learning. This is a complex notion, but one interpretation from this concept is that in a physical education context, the teacher and the student or students make up one or several communities of learnings in class. This depends on the structure and organization done by the teacher or the students. In this community, all participants present are legitimate parts as they will hopefully have the same aim and interest of the participation. The fact that they belong to the context makes them legitimate partners in the community of learning. Peripherality suggests that there is not a central participation as the opposite, but peripherality suggests that there is multiple, varied, more or less engaged and inclusive ways of being located in the community. Furthermore, peripherality is a positive term and a dynamic term, and when enabled suggests an opening, a way of gaining access to sources for understanding through growing involvement and full participation. Kirk and McDonald supports my interpretation, stating that their view is that the notion of legitimate peripheral participation signals a concern shared by other constructivist theories of learning for active involvement by persons in the construction of knowledge through meaningful social activity. If the physical education learning activities shall be perceived as meaningful for all students, the teachers must incorporate activities that students find meaningful outside school. And for students to access information about these activities, digital technology, and especially videos, plays an important role. Kirk and McDonald argues that school physical education has failed in this way, and that traditional sports and fitness dominates in an instruct and conduct didactical sphere, and that this approach or domain is reproducing itself. In this community is a social structure that involves relations of power. Sometimes the teacher leads and guides the learning and draws the students into growing involvement. Sometimes peer students play that role, or sometimes the teacher becomes the most peripheric and is empowered by the students. From this argument, we can see that these two theories of didactics and learning are fruitful to one another and seems to fit well. So how do digital technology play a role here? When most of the instructions are given in form of a preparational video, there will be more time for student-centered activity. One example is that students shall go in predefined groups and practice different motor skills, like balance, eye-hand coordination, or throwing a ball into a basket. and they are all explained in a video. Within the group, some of the students did prepare, but some did not. But they are all legitimate peripheral participants in their little learning community. Now and then the teacher comes by to check on them and help out, but those who did prepare will also take a role as empowerers as they become local teachers and guides. There might also be an iPad in each group so that some explanations might be revised. Here we can see that digital technology in form of a video in a flipped learning framework plays an important role, and it is in fact necessary to drive the learning forward. As Rovegno claims, in both constructivist and situated learning views, students' pre-existing knowledge facilitates and impedes learning, and in a flipped learning framework, digital technology in form of a video promotes this knowledge that students can bring into the learning situation in class. This description of how learning can occur in physical education stands in contrast to what we know from research on physical education and what and how goes on in class. The term instruct and conduct is well familiar, and we also know the dominant part of conducting sports and particularly ball play and fitness plays. Selander also claims teachers traditionally control time, space, and content in the learning, but with the introduction of digital technology, teachers lose this control, and that might be both petrifying and a contradiction to the values and wishes physical education teachers have for their profession. The learning landscape, in Selander's view, changes. Social roles are renegotiated and responsibilities are resituated due to access to knowledge through digital technology. A distributed design of learning suggests that learning happens in many spaces and that the learner co-creates these spaces of learning using the tools best suited for the context and situation, and that the teacher's primary role is to scaffold this learning. So we can see digital technology is something that we should press to our hearts. If we also add the purpose of physical education into the situation we see, into this situation, we see that what the theory of design or of the design-oriented didactical triangle and the theory situated learning as legitimate peripheral participation can promote more engagement as the learning communities are dependent on all participants and each student will get a closer relationship to their own learning as they also prepare for class and contributes to peer students and the teacher's learning or the teacher's learning. As the purpose of physical education, among other things, is to help students create and uphold a lifelong healthy lifestyle, the concept of autonomy is crucial. My argument is that the figure you see here leads to more autonomous students as they take more control over their own and peer students' learning. And again, digital technology is what facilitates and promotes this. The hearts grow even bigger. To round up this line of arguments, I will quote Liv and Wenger. In summary, rather than learning by replicating the performances of others or by acquiring knowledge transmitted in instruction, we suggest that learning occurs when centripetal participation in the learning curriculum of the ambient community. In this view, problems in schooling, including physical education, are not at their most fundamental level pedagogical. Above all, they have to do with the ways in which the community of adults reproduces itself, with the places that newcomers can or cannot find in such communities, and with relations that can or cannot be established between these newcomers and the cultural and political life of the community. So these are the theories and my interpretation of them. what about the present situation in school and in physical education? Technology has transformed much of our modern society and has completely formed how we read, write, think, and calculate. And Collins and Halverson say that these four actions constitute most of the activities in school, and yet technology has been kept in the periphery of schools, creating a deep incompatibility between schooling and technology. And Fulham, some years earlier, said that technology has dramatically affected virtually every sector in society, except education. Collins and Halverson further state that the next generation of public schooling must be able to adapt and incorporate technology-driven learning. If not, and I quote, students with the means and ability will pursue their learning outside of public school. Fulham might be a bit of an old reference in this context, but as we see, the views of Colin and Halverson supports the views of Fulham. So one might assume that things haven't been changing. We move from the role of technology in education to the role of technology specifically in physical education, and where we are today, we can say that we have somewhat a way to go. Kwek and Van Hilforde has stated that digital technology can give new perspectives and opportunities as new digital technologies are constantly emerging. But this is followed by a demand for new critical reflection and research into its potential benefits for physical education. Further, Armour, Casey and Goodyear states that while there is evidence of considerable growth in the availability and use of digital technology in physical education, there is very little evidence on how these technologies are being used and if they optimize student learning. Physical education teachers must understand how to select from all the digital information and technologies, and that without losing the sight of the main pedagogical and educational goals in physical education. As stated by Van Hilvorde and Kwek in 2018, and I quote, physical educators, scholars, and policymakers increasingly face the challenge and the need to create a digital pedagogy for physical education. So, if we think back to Kuhn and his description of states regarding paradigms, where are we? This is a schematic representation of Kuhn's theory of development in science, and we can assess where we are regarding science of digital technology in physical education. I claim that we are most likely at a pre-paradigmatic state or in the transition to a paradigm that follows by a normal science state. As a review of literature and the two statements that we saw clearly claims that there is unsystematically data generation and the issues and the questions asked are indistinct. But there are numerous of studies coming up, so we will finally start to move into this paradigm and to the state of normal science. But if this paradigm is still to be formed, what is the framework that can be part of the constitution of this upcoming framework? What is the purpose of flipped learning in physical education? Well, first of all, it's not just about the videos. The learning in class is the core and backbone of this framework. A proper framework on what flipped learning in physical education is must be put forward and tested. If not, inquiry regarding flipped learning in physical education most likely will nor be coherent or trustworthy. There are benefits we know so far, but I don't limit them to this list. But so far we know that flipped learning promotes more holistic competence or holistic development of competences, promotes more physical activity, more motivation, and it promotes a change in value in a positive direction for the subject of physical education. It promotes individualization and more cooperative work, and flipped learning is seen as a meta-instructional strategy in physical education. So the framework of flipped learning has to be put up and tested, and this framework can help us constitute a paradigm regarding the use of or the digital technology in physical education. But we must remember that flipped learning is not just another teaching tactic, but can function as a meta-instructional strategy. And this learning framework facilitates all other instructional strategies from project-based learning, inquiry learning, game-based learning, mastery learning, makerspaces, and a myriad of other active learning strategies into class time. From the general definition of flipped learning, we can see that physical education have somewhat the active and practical part, but we lack the individualization and innovative part. Here, digital technology might present itself as a solution for developing physical education for the future and a way for 21st century students to all achieve the purpose of physical education. We can recognize flipped learning as a facilitator for situated learning, where students learn from each other, with each other, forming a scaffold along with the teacher. So, how do I predict the future? Well, we are just in the middle of a pandemic situation where the COVID-19 virus is affecting education in a really profound way, and especially physical education. So I am asking myself, did this virus just start a revolution in physical education, according to Kuhn's descriptions of the phases and how we can then understand knowledge? Did digital technology just save physical education? Did experiencing the late thought of as impossible, and by that I mean distant learning in physical education, just became experienced as very well possible and fruitful? Did we just enter the crisis state, skipping the normal science state? And Fjordhoft said, if the outcome of a crisis, well, and then it's in relation to these changes in or creations of paradigms. If the outcome of a crisis is a change in a paradigm or a scientific revolution, one will get a dramatic reconstruction of the subject based on a new foundation. If we now, by these experiences that we are facing now, are making a transition to a new paradigm. When this transition to the new paradigm is done, the researcher will have a totally new view on the scientific discipline, its methods, purpose, and basic assumptions. We have a new scientific worldview that is not compatible with the old one. The aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic might just be a new paradigm in PE science, where digital technology plays an omnipresent and imperative role. With Kuhn's thoughts on paradigm seen through a pragmatic lens, I will make the following assumption, and this will stand as my conclusion for the lecture. Physical education that embraces digital technologies, like in a flipped learning framework, and in a design-oriented didactical framework promoting situated learning. That is my hope for the future, so that the purpose of physical education can be achieved by all students. These are the references.